we're going to get started. Thank you all for joining today. Many of you are regular members of this working group and have been with us for the last year or more. We have opened up this meeting, our last meeting, and the next one as part of a special series on the Farm Bill and other 2022 policy priorities to a broader public and invited people from our networks. And so there's some of you that are new to this working group and our guests. And so I'm going to give a brief introduction and then I'm going to pass it over to our speakers, our featured speakers that we have for today. So for those of you that are newer, this is part of the American Sustainable Business Network's Regenerative Agriculture and Justice Working Group. We have been a group for a little over a year now. Here's some of our members. It's actually not completely up to date. And going to the next slide. Early on in the formation of our working group, we agreed, formulated, and voted on some collective principles. And here's sort of a summary of some of the top line points of those principles that were meant to inform the policy work that we are doing. We're a broad coalition bringing together businesses from across sectors, along with environmental justice and farm organizational partners. And so recognizing that we all come from different backgrounds, we wanted to make sure that we are on the same page and working towards at least some shared goals in this working group. And again, here's an overview of some of those shared goals around regenerative agriculture, around farm labor and environmental justice, and around achieving resilience in our food and farming system. And I'll be sharing these slides in the follow-up. So for any of you that are new to this group and new to this topic, you'll be able to delve a little bit more into the information we have here. So again, this is part of a special series for this working group. On December 9th, we had presenters from Kiss the Ground, Green America, Farm Workers Association of Florida. Today, we'll have National Family Farm Coalition, Federation of Southern Cooperatives, and Earth Justice. And we're still confirming what will be our the final meeting of this series. But so far, it looks like we might have some guest speakers or speakers lined up from Intertribal Agriculture Council, Organic Trade Association, and NRDC. And I know some of you from those organizations on this call have been in conversation with you, but still looking to solidify for the next meeting. So actually, we'll go back to this slide. Here's some of the marker bills that we've been working on over the past year or so, some that we might be working on moving forward into the future. But as 2022 is starting, so are Farm Bill negotiations. The House Ag Committee Chairman has announced that in the next few weeks or so, Farm Bill negotiations will be beginning in their early stages. The Farm Bill likely won't be passed until 2023, but now is the time to get on top of it and start deliberating and establishing our priorities and start the process of educating the public and policymakers on what we want to see out of the next Farm Bill. For those of you that are uninitiated, the Farm Bill is a largely contested piece of legislation, package and omnibus legislation, meaning it brings together thousands of different programs and policies to be passed every 4 years or so to reauthorize it mostly deals with the USDA, reauthorizing USDA programs, and it is a huge opportunity to advance what we want to see out of a regenerative and just food and farming future. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our speakers. If you want to get in contact with me, this information will be at the end of the slide as well. If you want to learn more information on our working group and our regenerative agriculture work, you can see the link there. And so I'm going to pass it over to Rajani from Earth Justice. Sorry, Rajani, I forgot to put your affiliation there. She's Senior Legislative Representative, and I know you have some slides for us. Rajani, would you like to share your own screen? Or actually, I did incorporate them in this PowerPoint if you prefer that. whichever's easiest.
Yeah, I'll share my own screen actually, because I did make a couple edits to the presentation that I sent you, if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, just 1 second. Bear with us, everyone. All right, Rajani, you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, are you able to see the slides?
Yes.
There's a big wolf on the first one. Okay,
Yes, thank you.
great. Well, hello everyone. My name is Ranjini. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with Earth Justice. I work as a senior legislative representative, lobbying on behalf of climate and agriculture issues and a couple other things, but that's relevant to this group today. And I see some familiar faces and some new ones, and so great to see you. And I hope that we can connect more after this meeting. So I wanted to just run through a couple priorities that Earth Justice has been thinking about in terms of Farm Bill and put it out there and see how this resonates with others and if we could collaborate. So first of all, you might be wondering if you're not familiar with Earth Justice, maybe you've heard of us, but you're not completely sure what we do. I'll just give a quick rundown on who we are. So, Earth Justice is a nonprofit environmental law organization, and each day our lawyers go to court to take on the corrupt and powerful. And we hold them accountable when they put profits over people and the planet. We fight to create and enforce strong environmental laws and work in partnership with our clients and our allies to ensure that the right to a healthy environment is guaranteed for all. Within Earth Justice is the policy and legislation team, which I work on as a lobbyist. And this team works for legislation and administrative policy that advances environmental justice, protects our lands, oceans, and wildlife, and secures 100% clean energy for our future. And so just a little bit about our clients. Earth Justice represents a broad range of clients, from environmental organizations with millions of members to one-stop-like communities settled generations ago on the edge of our nation's vast wild expanses. All of our clients are fighting to make our planet a healthier place, and each one gets a top-tier legal representation absolutely for free. This means that we choose the clients we represent and the cases we litigate based on overall impact in our fight for a better future for our planet, not on the ability to pay. And then I also wanted to introduce you to our Sustainable Food and Farming program. I believe my colleague, Carrie Apfel, is on this call today, and she's one of the attorneys on our Sustainable Food and Farming program. So this is a team comprised of an amazing group of attorneys who aim to make our nation's food system safer and more climate friendly. So as we firm up our priorities for the 2023 Farm Bill, we're spending this time, getting input from our allies and partners, finding where Earth Justice can contribute our resources and expertise. So today I'm just going to do a run through of some of the points that we had in mind. This is by no means comprehensive, but this is just a list of things that we're thinking about as we wait to see if, maybe when, Build Back Better will support important programs. So first of all, conservation funding and compliance. We're supporting a significant expansion of conservation compliance, making sure that environmental practices required to be implemented as a condition of receipt of any Farm Bill subsidies, and also improve oversight with a preference for climate-friendly practices. We also want to expand comprehensive reform of the conservation title by making federal programs flexible and accessible for small and mid-sized farms, historically excluded producers, as well as for organic, diversified, and rotational grazing operations. This also includes protecting marginal and environmentally sensitive land through long-term contracts and easements, and also adequately protecting against soil erosion and grassland loss. And then number two, something else we have on our mind is crop insurance reform. Like many others in the farm sector, Earth Justice believes that a robust crop insurance program backed by the federal government is an important component of an effective farm safety net. So major reform of crop insurance means to discount climate-friendly practices and reduce premium subsidies on destructive, non-climate-friendly practices. It means expanding access to serve all types of farmers based on their risk management needs, with an emphasis on new and young farmers as well. And then improving the delivery of the crop insurance program to make sure that it is more transparent and efficient. And then, research and development, major increases here, especially into measurement and monitoring of ag emissions and climate solutions, especially regarding nitrous oxide, enteric methane emissions. This also includes support for research programs that expand support for beginning farmer training and technical assistance programs, education programs on asset building and financial literacy. We're also interested in creating systems to collect and analyze, regional data, potentially in pilot programs, and ensure that best practices are adopted that could assist in some long-term efforts. And for these reasons, we also recommend additional funding for climate research and monitoring, especially focused on regional resilience. And then the last thing to throw out there is plant-based proteins, something we've been thinking about in the past year and more. Basically seeing how we can advocate for a major increase in resources to scale up plant-based proteins, which, as many of you know, create far fewer emissions than animal proteins. And by way of this, we would also support changes in procurement policies so that consumer choices are made easier. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're keen on spending this time gathering insights from our allies and within our coalitions. So this is just a short list of coalitions that we have been in touch with and participate in with regards to Farm Bill efforts. By no means is this comprehensive, but we do feel really grateful to be part of some coalitions that are on the cutting edge of figuring out what 2023 could mean for us. And so, as I mentioned earlier, if any of this resonates with you or you'd like to learn more about Earth Justice, my email will be at the end of these slides, and we'd love to continue gathering insight from various partners. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to continue forward to a slightly different topic, but one that is definitely within the realm of what Earth Justice is thinking about with the Farm Bill. So one idea that kind of came to us and we've been ruminating on for a while was this idea of creating another title in the Farm Bill for climate change. This would basically be to affirm the importance of climate in the Farm Bill and also include provisions to further strengthen climate program integrity across the Farm Bill. So there are basically two different ways that we've been thinking about this. One is that in creating a title of its own, it is sort of affirming that the Farm Bill has to be, from this point on, with this idea that climate is going to be an emphasis of every program that we have. And so maybe having a title of its own sort of does affirm that importance. And then another way of looking at it is that, climate change is so comprehensive in the ag space, and there are elements of climate programs in every single title. So how do we balance that in terms of making sure that climate is a very comprehensive conversation when we talk about the Farm Bill, whether it is its own title or not? And if it is its own title, what does that mean for making sure that title is as robust as possible, given that other titles do touch upon climate programs? So this is just a somewhat short list. There's plenty more where this came from of what kind of programs or ideas would be under this so-called climate change title. And I just added in parentheses the titles that these things actually belong to in the current Farm Bill, just so we have an idea of, how cross-cutting this is and whether people think that a new title actually makes sense or not. we've kind of taken this conversation to various partners and coalitions, trying to get some insight into whether this was a worthy effort or not, if there was enough mass behind it, and if people felt like this was a good way of making sure climate programs got the attention and importance that it deserves, but more importantly, also gets the funding that is required to make sure that we see the change we want to see. And I'm happy to send this slide deck to Colton, just so this is a handy resource to anyone. And again, would love to hear your thoughts, whether you think this is an idea that you'd either advocate for or at least want to learn more about. We're always open ears and would love to hear from you. So that is the end of the presentation that I had in terms of Earth Justice's priorities. Again, my name is Ranjini and my email address is found here, and I'll put it in the chat as well. And yeah, looking forward to hearing from any of you.
Thanks, Rajini. So I forgot to mention, but I put in the chat that there's an opportunity, or we're going to offer opportunity to ask each of our speakers questions that you may have. So we'll have that now after each speaker goes, and then also we'll have opportunity for more discussion at the end of the call if there's time. So does anybody have questions for Rajini? You can either put them in the chat, the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand in Zoom. And Liza, if you could help monitor to see if monitored for questions, that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat from Klaus. How does your group get funded?
Oh, I see. Yeah. Rajini, are you comfortable with answering that? Or
Yeah.
Klaus, did you want to maybe expand on that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, funding seems to be a critical piece for because these are nonprofit efforts. So we are also starting to mobilize in this space, and we are keenly interested in what funding sources are available that support a community development project.
And maybe Rajini, if you'd like to go into it, that's okay. But maybe I can connect you two after the call, because it might be a discussion that might be better in private. But Rajini.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Klaus, and would love to chat more offline. In terms of how Earth Justice is funded, our funding comes from individual donations and foundations. We are a nonprofit law firm that does provide pro bono assistance, and so that's where we get our funding from. We don't receive any funding from corporations or governments. So in terms of our revenue, that's what we're looking at, and would love to chat more offline in terms of what funding is available and how we help resource other organizations.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I'll connect you two. And Nancy, you had a question? Nancy Darren?
Yes, thank you so much. Are you differentiating between CAFOs and the importance of getting animals back out onto the land in diversified systems? Pardon me, I got a frog. I'm really concerned about what seems to be a lack of discernment between the absolute horror and climate unfriendly aspects of CAFO production and the vital role that ruminants play on the landscape and on all the marginal lands that shouldn't be in cropland and need to be grazed. And that's an issue I see in a number of different groups, and I'm very concerned that if we don't really highlight and begin to discern and differentiate, we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not the cow, it's the how. And the amazing things I've seen personally and secondhand from folks who are restoring landscapes, birds, pollinators, soil, with the use of holistic planned grazing and management of animals back on the landscape. So that's my question.
Thanks, Nancy. Yes, we are making that differentiation, and thank you for bringing that up. I think this might also be related to the plant-based proteins component of our Farm Bill thinking, and yeah, agree with you wholeheartedly.
Thank you both. And yes, Nancy, that's a distinction we make in the work that we're doing, and also an ongoing discussion we've actually been having over a mailing list. And we'll love to get in contact with you after this offline and loop you in more to the work we're doing on regenerative grazing and holistic grazing.
Okay, thank you. And I forgot one comment I do want to say. I follow Dr. Christine Jones' work, among others, and the whole methane issue, that healthy soils have methanotropes that are not observed in sterile soils in labs. And again, to have that discernment that there is part of the natural cycle that methane is a part of, but we've completely screwed that one up too. But again, it's not the cows, it's the how.
That's great. Yeah, I like that. It's not the cows, the how. And does anyone else have questions? It looks like we had a question in the chat that Rajani, you addressed. Did you want to maybe address that verbally for the group?
Sure. Barbara Brown asked, would you support funding for research on sequestering carbon as well as in well-managed soils? Well-graced land will sequester carbon and reduce drought. Yeah, absolutely. We actually have a staff scientist, Mustafa Saifuddin, who is on board on our sustainable food and farming team, and they do research on soil and agree that this should be part of our Farm Bill advocacy.
I have a question. I'm just jumping in here, unless there is an order.
No, I think no one else has their hand raised, and I can't see who's talking, but yeah, please take it away. And this will be the last question for Rajani. We'll move on to our next speakers, and then we'll also have probably have some more time to circle back for questions for everyone.
So I live in Ohio, and right now there's a big push of solar farms. And they are following the utility lines, which are on farmland, which is good. And I also think about this as a possibility of saving the land, and because you have 25-year contracts, and these solar farms are on this land. How do we start to create guidelines to do practical or thoughtful farming underneath this, right? So you have the soil here, you can nurture and nourish for 25 years, so that when the solar moves, let's say we think of them as a crop and they move to the next crop, that can be used to grow food again if we think of it thoughtfully. So that's something I'm seeing, this large, lots of solar farms, and I think about the land underneath it and how to protect it for future farming.
Thank you,
Rajani.
Eve. I wasn't sure if that was a question directly for me or if it was a
it
thought,
kind of is. It's thinking, because you're dealing with a bunch of different developers. They're large developers and a lot of energy. It's not just kind, it's not necessarily kindness, it's money driven. It's not about, and so it is something to think about. And so I'm just wondering if there's any policies or people are looking at this or thinking about this or kind of putting some legality to it, because it's happening. And Ohio always gets this, we have the hydraulic fracking that kind of came in and it's, deregulated, to now solar farms, which are great. I'm totally 100% renewable. I actually volunteer for that. But now I just want best practices to be put in place so it becomes really thoughtful.
Bear in mind that in some states, the industrial sized farms, both solar and wind, are not regulated. They're not permitted, and they strip the topsoil underneath and sell it for local construction. So in 25 years, there will be a rock pile there with decaying infrastructure, because they won't repair them. It won't be economic. So it's a big deal, and we would love to have some legal folks that would work with us on fixing the regs.
There is in a number of states legislation to deal with the management of the soil under solar farms. So we can do that separately online. There's a few states that have been, putting those that legislation on the docket.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stephen, sorry to jump in. Thank you for jumping in. Yeah, I'm just to interrupt. I think this is a great question and issue. Thank you, Eve, for bringing it up. And I think we have several people on the call that are jumping in that are sort of more expertise in it. And I'm going to connect you offline with them, like Stephen. I know Emily jumped in the chat, and we'll continue this offline. But thank you for the question. It's a very important issue. So to move forward, I'm going to pass it over to our next speaker, Dania. And instead of pulling up the slides again, I'm just going to put her on speaker view, or Liza, if you could help me with that, so we can all see Dania. There we go. Spotlight, there we go. All right, Dania Davies with the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, who has been a member of this working group since the very beginning, actually. She is new, and I'm going to let her introduce herself. She did send me a bio, but I'm having a hard time pulling it up right now. So Dania, please take it away.
Thanks, Colton. Hi, everyone. Dania Davies. I'm the Director of Land Retention and Advocacy at the Federation, just shy of a year into this role, and this is definitely a big year, with it being a Farm Bill year. For those of you who don't know, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund is a 55-year-old nonprofit cooperative association of cooperatives serving members that include Black farmers, landowners, and cooperatives. And so I kind of want to tell a little bit of the history of how the Federation developed its priorities. And some of these priorities I wrote about in my nonprofit quarterly article, Toward a Pro-Black USDA Policy Regime. So if you read that, you can probably just smile and nod while I talk. But for those of you who haven't read it, that'll be available to go a little bit more in depth in what I'll talk about, because I wanted to address the fact that our members make all of the decisions about our priorities. And so we will be having two resources, an advocacy institute through which we will be training 100 of our members to be able to host different events and participate in any kind of visits with their elected officials, as well as to be able to understand and kind of translate some of this jargon into terms that's more appropriate and accessible for their communities. And then the other thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be having a monthly listening session that will also be highlighted through our monthly podcast. And we're just trying to really engage all of our members in all of the ways that we possibly can to make sure that it's not the staff that's driving what our Farm Bill priorities will be, but it's really going to be driven by the needs and interests of our members. That being said, at our last annual meeting, we did have each of the states kind of identify what our overarching priorities would be. And these will appear, I'm sure, again, through our Farm Bill priorities. Just a little bit of the historical context of how these priorities came into existence. And our history goes way back further, but we did a lot of the advocacy leading up to the 1990 Farm Bill. And so 2501 and, the advocacy around, it started out as a Black farmer justice priority, and that kind of morphed into the term socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. And so for us, we saw that term playing a prominent role in the American Rescue Plan last year, and the debt relief being a really big promise to America's Black farmers and other socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers who, because of lack of access to equitable credit, often bear the brunt of the debt burdens that overwhelm and often result in land loss. And so our farmers were really excited about the debt relief that they were promised and that was legislated under ARPA. And those of you who know this story know that then there was litigation that was now a class action that is taking place in Texas, where farmers are disputing whether or not farmers and ranchers of color who have been historically well-documented victims of race-based discrimination by the USDA are entitled to this debt relief. And so we kind of see that having a huge impact, that litigation having a huge impact on Build Back Better, where Build Back Better has kind of dropped in some of this debt relief language, but instead of having a race-based focus for equity, it's shifted to the term economically distressed. And so for us, that kind of signals both the litigation and the language shift in Build Back Better kind of signals to us that racial equity is in jeopardy. And this term that's getting tossed around as an advocate and to our members is constitutional scrutiny. And so the ways in which racial equity has been a top priority for this administration, for the USDA throughout the priorities are directly coming under attack, not just from folks who do not understand the history of race-based discrimination by the USDA, but also may not see a need for there to be any specific programs under the 2023 Farm Bill that specifically address racial equity. And so to that end, one of our biggest priorities is just to really see that racial equity commitment that both the administration and the USDA have continued to act in dedication to, that racial equity commitment be reflected in every title of the Farm Bill. I think one of the issues with 2501 and those terms being really discrete, I think that's part of the ways in which they're very subject to attack, because it can be dropped in as easily as it can be drafted out. And so we really want to see that commitment kind of throughout the entire Farm Bill, because we know the reality of this country is that we have never achieved any modicum of racial equity. And it's a very significant issue, and it affects not only our farm and food systems, but also our rural communities, access to food, and then consequently disparities in health outcomes. And so it's really important for our membership that there be dedication and commitment to racial equity in every title of the Farm Bill. We also want to see, because of our work in land retention, we want to see ongoing commitments to heirs property and those specific ways in which our members, Black farmers and landowners, are more susceptible and more vulnerable to land loss. And that's a commitment that we're working with a lot of our allies and partners. National Family Farm Coalition has played a huge role. And that's one of the things the Young Farmers Coalition also, they're interested in land access. And we think that there's a really good marriage between land retention and land access efforts for historically underserved groups, especially around the racial equity paradigm. And so that's another big focus for us, as well as can't be left out until and unless Build Back Better gets passed. The debt relief that was promised is really in significant jeopardy. And so not only has credit access historically and continues to be a problem for Black farmers, to the extent that we think that there really needs to be a dedicated Black farmer financial institution that's owned by Black farmers, hopefully cooperatively owned, so that they can be in control of the ways in which they have access to credit. But we really think that this debt relief issue cannot drop off of the forefront of everyone's attention. We have many members, as many of you may know. We did file a motion to intervene that was denied. We have appealed that motion, that denial. But many of our members, they started their operation for last year in reliance on that promised debt relief, because it came out very early in the year. So we had folks that were, planning for their entire season based on the anticipation of that debt relief. That debt relief never came, and now they're facing foreclosures, especially those who have guaranteed loans, as well as the fact that now they're going into this season less in a more vulnerable position in terms of having access to credit. And so it's really kind of a worst case scenario because of the promised debt relief not being fulfilled And so we really think it's a very urgent and critical issue, and it's very timely, and time is of the essence, because I get basically every day I get calls about folks receiving foreclosure notices. Now, the USDA is not moving forward on direct loans, but there are folks that are that have a guaranteed loans that they're not under any, the guaranteed lenders aren't under any requirement not to move forward with the foreclosures. And so it really is crisis time for our members who were relying on that debt relief. Obviously, as us being a cooperative, we think support for cooperatives and just a broader understanding of the significance of cooperatives in rural communities. And so support for cooperative development to improve rural economies, and as well as access to locally produced food. Throughout the lockdown, our members were producing the food that their communities had access to. And so we really think that there needs to be dedicated support for cooperatives that kind of stood in that gap when there really wasn't access to the traditional food system. And to that end, we also think there needs to be dedicated investments and ongoing support for infrastructure development. And I know broadband is a big buzz. Obviously, that's huge for our members. A lot of our rural members don't even have access to broadband. And then all of these applications to loans, to USDA programs and services. Now there's apps and everything's online, and we have communities that are completely excluded from accessing those programs because they don't have broadband. But in addition, the more fundamental aspects of infrastructure that I think often get overlooked, including refrigeration and cooling systems, storage and packing systems, and transportation and trucking. So these are huge, huge issues that will, we think, allow the South to really own and control a regional food system that can really bring us up to the level of production that we have. The production footprint that we have doesn't match our wealth or food access opportunities. And we really want to see those two things aligned so the South can build back cooperatively and build back better and stronger. And then finally, but not least, we are committed to supporting language in the Farm Bill that's around agroforestry, climate, and environment, especially for those that support underserved racial groups in their communities. So if any of those sound like priorities that you'd be interested in working on, we are actively working with our allies and partners. This is not going to be a light lift. And I did want to, just in the interest of time, try to say it pretty briefly, but I think that one of the mainstream narratives that we really need to get debunked is this Black versus white narrative that I think has become pretty mainstream. That is not our reality. Our membership, while our primary and predominant membership are Black farmers and cooperatives, we have always had members and allies. As a matter of fact, National Family Farm Coalition was getting some of our white allies were writing op-eds in support of the ARPA debt relief and in support of the Federation's motion to intervene. And so the reality is that in the rural communities, our power is limitless. It's racially diverse. It doesn't reflect the mainstream narrative of divisiveness. And so we really do want to see a multiracial unified coalition that's telling the truth about the ways in which the South is cooperating and providing for their communities. And so I'm here to answer questions. I will put my email in the chat. I didn't have a PowerPoint presentation. I apologize for that. But if you do have any questions or comments, you'd like to participate or support any of our listening sessions or our podcast effort to keep our members informed about the most pressing issues moving forward towards the Farm Bill, please don't hesitate to reach out to me.
Thank you so much, Dania. And I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions now. Again, please either put them in the chat, raise your hand, or put them in the Q&A box. Any questions for Dania? No, there's got to be some questions.
I have a question. Thanks so much, Dania, for this presentation. Really fascinating work that you do, and I hope you get a lot of collaboration. I'm wondering if you know, who are kind of like partners that you're already working with on the finance side, that help farmers Black farmers get better access to credit and land, buying back land or retaining their land? Like, who is already engaged in that work as well?
Do you mean funders, or do you mean some of our allies that are helping us to advocate for these opportunities?
Funders, banks, who's actually already providing capital?
Well, we've historically, so the Land Assistance Fund part of the Federation was historically one of those resources for our community. We are trying to re-engage that aspect of our work. We do have several of the founding members of the Federation were community credit unions. And so we really believe in the agency of the communities themselves to really support and generate the resources necessary to maintain that wealth in their local communities. We try to work with and collaborate with cooperative lenders, and those are some of our biggest cooperative banks, and cooperative lenders are some of our biggest allies and resources, but there's definitely a huge gap and opportunity there. So if you have any recommendations, or if that could be a broader conversation for us to have offline, I would definitely welcome and invite that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And I'm going to pass it. Unfortunately, we're getting low on time. So I'm just going to give Matthew, who raised his hand first, an opportunity to ask a question. And then Stephen and Barbara, after our last speaker goes, if we have time, we can circle back to your questions for Dania. Fortunately, we're getting near the end. But Matthew?
Dania, thanks for your comments. I'm wondering if you've heard any updates on Section 1006 of the American Rescue Plan. It's my understanding that USDA's legal team does not feel like the lawsuits that shut down the loan forgiveness, shut down that 1.2 or 3 billion for technical assistance and research to underserved ag communities. Have you heard any update about potential rollouts for RFPs, or what the timing is for actually getting that money into the hands of the communities?
Fantastic question. My understanding, and it's subject to anyone else's insight on this call, is that those cooperative agreements that were announced at the end of last year, I believe there were about 20 organizations that were identified as communities, as community-based organizations that had a history of serving historically excluded groups. That was kind of going to be a way in which 1006 was going to be implemented through those cooperative agreements. I'm not sure if that's the totality of USDA's plan to roll out 1006, but I know that that's at least one part of how they're implementing it. I do think that there was a chilling effect on the implementation of 1006 caused by the 1005 litigation. But I think that one of the creative solutions was that, and I can share that announcement with you if you email me about those.
Any word on the timeline of it, of like, you know, March, you know, anything?
I'm not,
okay.
I wish I knew, because we were one of the groups.
Right.
We were one of the groups that was identified as a possible community-based organization for this, for one of the cooperative agreements. But as most recently as the secretary's visit on Monday, I'm not exactly sure of the timeline of the disbursement of the funds. But that's a great question, and I'll be happy to share with you any updates as it becomes available.
Great. I'll send you a note with some context. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Great. Thank you. All right, we're going to pass it over to Jordan. Thank you so much, Dania.
Thanks, everyone.
Let's see. I'm going to spotlight Jordan here. All right, Jordan Trico is joining us today from the National Family Farm Coalition. Instead of giving a lengthy introduction, I'm just going to pass it to you, Jordan, because we're 15 minutes left.
Thanks so much, Colton. I will try to be brief. Appreciate this opportunity to speak with you all today. I'm Jordan Trico with the National Family Farm Coalition. We are a national alliance of 30 community-based and farmer-led organizations across the country, representing family farmers, ranchers, and fishermen. And the Federation is one of our founding members. And so certainly when we get into Farm Bill work, and as always, we'll work hand in hand with them on their, promoting and uplifting their Farm Bill priorities. NFSC has been around since the mid 1980s to be a voice for those producers in DC. So we primarily work on federal policy advocacy. But I want to take today, rather than doing an overview of all of our Farm Bill priorities, I want to zero in on one of those priorities that Colton has asked me to present on, which is our work around the dairy crisis. We have a large number of dairy farmers in our network, and we're uplifting the dairy crisis as a key piece of our Farm Bill work going forward for a few reasons. So I want to just sort of lay those out and then just highlight a couple pillars of our proposal, and then hopefully have a couple of minutes for questions at the end. We think dairy work on the dairy sector is really important because it's one of the few sectors of commodity production that is still primarily family scale producers. And the decentralization of production is critical for the vitality and resilience of rural economies. Once we see consolidation that we've seen a little bit more in things like wheat and corn and other commodity crops, once that happens, it's really difficult to walk back. So we still feel like even though there's been a lot of consolidation in dairy, we're still at a point where we can keep a lot of smaller scale operations on the land. We also think dairy is important because, as was already mentioned today, it's an area of animal agriculture that, if it's done right, can be an important sector for addressing the climate crisis and addressing emissions. We believe that more dairy cows on pasture rather than in confinement, producing a high value good food for local food systems is the way to go. And we have examples from Canada's dairy supply management system showing that supply management can help lower emissions in dairy. Canada has an average carbon footprint for 1 liter of Canadian milk is less than half the global average. So we think that the U.S. needs to move in that direction. And then lastly, dairy is really important because federal policy plays such an important role in shaping farm gate prices and the trajectory of the sector. So we believe collectively, all of us as farmer, environmental, consumer advocates, we need to, together push to make sure that public policy are defending the public interest and doing things like strengthening competition, addressing consolidation, and promoting social and ecological principles, like economic and environmental justice in rural communities. And so the dairy sector is a really, I think, important space for that. Despite the challenges, despite the importance of dairy, there's been a lot of challenges over the past decades. I think all of you all have probably seen images of farmers being forced to dump milk in 2020, despite many grocery stores lacking dairy products. There's been more recent coverage of the 80+ organic dairy farmers in the Northeast who are being cut off from their processor without a clear alternative on where they can sell their milk, which is essentially an economic foreclosure on their business. These are symptoms of a system that has not been serving dairy farmers for decades. USDA has been very clear that the rate of consolidation in dairy, particularly in processing, is higher than the rest of U.S. agriculture. Just since 2017, 1/3 of milk sales are now coming from large-scale dairies with over 2,500 cows. And the 4 largest dairy cooperatives are marketing 41% of all U.S. milk. The rate of farm foreclosure in dairy has been, particularly since 2018, has been really staggering and tragic. The dairy sector has lost nearly 70% of its dairy farms just in the last 20 years. While at the same time, the number of cows in the U.S. and the amount of milk produced has increased. Just to give you a sort of snapshot of the on-farm impacts of that consolidation trend. It's not like dairy farmers aren't speaking out. and speaking out for farmers on, corporate power and retaliation, can have really significant impacts on their businesses. There have been many high-profile lawsuits from dairy farmers against processors for price fixing and discrimination in the last years. There are farmers like our board president, Jen Goodman, who has sat in the same room with Secretary Vilsack in the Department of Justice in 2010, raising these concerns. And we just haven't seen a lot of response from our political system. So this is all happening in the context of dairy policy for the last 40 years, sort of being chipped away at the farmer protections and price supports that we've had in this country historically, not only for dairy following the New Deal. And this, and one way to look at it is this is really culminated in 2020 when the Secretary of Agriculture from the last administration, telling a group of dairy farmers in the Midwest who are in crisis to get big or get out, which we feel like is really prioritizing one kind of farming or one scale of farming over another. With that framing, we at NFSC are really trying to take a systemic look at the challenges facing dairy and draw some lessons from U.S. agriculture policy history in this country, as well as some of our neighbors, to try to move the sector in a different direction. So after a long process of a consultation with our members and many of our allies, we've put together a policy proposal called the Milk from Family Dairies Act. And thank you, Colton, for dropping a link in the chat there. And I think that this act is very much in alignment with a lot of the principles of this working group that Colton mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, particularly the principle around parity prices for farmers. So in the minutes left, I just want to highlight a couple key pillars. It's a long proposal, and I'm just going to touch on a couple of them. First is price floors. Currently, dairy pricing for producers is incredibly opaque. Most farmers don't know what they're going to be, what their milk check is going to be until weeks after the milk has left their farm. We believe dairy farmers deserve a fair price for producing good quality food and being environmental stewards of their land. And to do this, we need equitable price floors that are based on farmers' cost of production, something similar to a minimum wage. It's not a new concept. We've had price floors for a long time in this country, but they've been reduced and lowered so low that they're really only a price security for the largest producers. So we need to re-look at again price floors on an equitable scale. The second is supply management. U.S. dairy farmers have had to make up for chronically low prices by increasing their production. And this means that federal policy is essentially incentivized overproducing milk and making us dependent on export markets. We think that there needs to be a system that, in a nutshell, what we're proposing is that the vast majority of farmers, those with 300 cows or less, are able to produce at a scale that they have been producing at for the last 5 years. But as a trade-off for getting a price floor, we ask them not to produce more. So this would sort of help them transition off of the productionist treadmill that has so many social and ecological impacts. At the same time, we're asking the largest mega dairies, farms that may have 10,000 cows in confinement, to gradually scale down their production while also getting a price floor based on their costs of production. This is similar to what Canada has, but it's sort of a U.S. version of that. And then I know I'm running out of time here, so I'll just mention two last things. We think that we need antitrust enforcement coupled with important investments in regional dairy infrastructure, so that we're decentralizing the processing sector so that farmers have options on where to take their milk. And we also really need to invest in a new generation of dairy farmers, particularly BIPOC and other socially disadvantaged communities, so that as the ag sector ages out, that we're keeping those farms on the land, and that farm knowledge transferring to the next generation, so we don't lose these producers. glad to see this getting some attention on the Hill. There's a subcommittee hearing in the Senate in September as a good first step. We've also seen a really strong showing of support from our allies, from farmer groups, labor organizations, environmental voices, consumer advocates for the elements of this proposal. And we're working to get this proposal into Farm Bill negotiations going into 2023. So I will drop some links to the proposal, to our sign-on letter, and my contact information, and would really appreciate the opportunity to talk to any of you all who may be interested in working with us on this going forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jordan. Any questions for Jordan? Please raise your hand, put them in the chat or Q&A box. Question from Nancy.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Such important work as everybody's doing. Is there any hope of Danon mitigating or reversing and helping protect those 89 dairies up in New England? I've been vaguely following that and really distressed about it. So I didn't know. I know that. I mean, can they get their B Corp designation revoked, or are there any efforts to try and get that particular issue turned around or mitigated?
Thanks so much for that question. Yeah, it is a really tragic situation. We are really focused mostly on trying to support our state-based organizations that are trying to provide technical assistance to those operations that are looking to be cut off. I think the best case, the best option for those producers is probably to be picked up by another processor. There have been rumors of other processors that may be interested in picking them up. That would, I think, would be the most seamless and fair opportunity for their businesses. But that's not to say that this also raises a lot of important questions around the need for regional, infrastructure, institutional purchasing, and I think that in my feeling, this situation with Danon is more a symptom of a broader problem, and so it's not just Danon. We've seen farmers get cut off in this way for a very long time, and so that's why we need a national policy that really changes the direction of the sector as a whole, rather than having to fight these battles in different states at different times of folks getting cut off, because it's sort of playing whack-a-mole, and we need to look at the underlying issues.
Great, thank you. And we are at the top of the hour. There is one more question from Tess around new farmers. I think we'll let that be the last question for the day. And in the meantime, all of our speakers' emails have been put in the chat, and we'll send them in the follow-up. So if anyone would like to get in contact, have any more questions or anything they would like to discuss, there will be an opportunity. But yeah, let's wrap up with this last question from Tess. I believe it's directed towards Jordan, but what policy measures would support the development of new farmers as you describe in the Farm Bill, or not? Or Farm Bill or beyond? Yeah.
Thanks for that question, Tess. It's a really important one. We think that there are some good programs out there, like the photo program, that helps provide resources and training for new and beginning farmers and socially disadvantaged farmers, and we'd love to see some components specific to the dairy sector in terms of training being built into some of those existing programs. We also think that extension of credit is a really important for folks, particularly in dairy, to get into the sector. There are so many barriers to entry in terms of cost for buying a herd, buying the machinery for milking, that producers who are doing, say, fruits and vegetables direct market don't have the same upfront costs. So there's certainly a credit discussion around helping farmers, young and beginning farmers, get into the sector. The other piece of this is in our, supply management vision for the dairy sector, we need to make sure that as we try to scale down production of the largest dairies and, really help those smaller scale dairies maintain their production levels, as we do this rebalancing of our dairy markets, that also creates space for new and beginning farmers to get into the sector. So accommodating those folks in that supply management system is something that we think is important, that really differs from the Canadian model, where it's very hard for young and beginning farmers to get into dairy in Canada. And so that's a sort of a unique piece that we're trying to bring to the conversation here in the US.
All right, thank you, Jordan. Thank you, everyone. I see we had a last comment from Aisha. But thank you, everyone, for sticking with us till the end. We've had some great presentations today. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you, Jordan, Dania, and Ranjani. And I did put information on getting more information about our campaign. There's some website links. I put my contact info in the chat, and we also will follow up with all this info. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day, and let's charge on and make some change in the next Farm Bill. All right, thank you. Bye.
Thanks.